the revelation that there was not one, but two killers donning the iconic mask and scream, it's been left up to us, the fans, to decide for ourselves which Ghostface was who throughout the movie. So in this video, we're gonna examine all the evidence and make a complete forensic and psychological breakdown of Billy and Stu's elaborate murder scheme. What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here. Guys, I started this channel because I'm a huge horror geek, and if you're like me, you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on those bell notifications so you can stay up to date with all my latest videos. Just for shits and gigs, toss this one a thumbs up and let me know in the comments down below who you think was behind the mask in each scene. And please don't say Roman or Dewey, come on guys. But of course, these are only my personal opinions based on direction, timing, logic, continuity, and the fact that I've watched this movie 20 goddamn times. So without any further ado, let's CSI the shit out of this. I already addressed the opening scene in my animated play-by-play video, so I'll just go over the important details here. If you haven't seen the video though, I highly suggest you watch it, as it does offer a very comprehensive deconstruction of what I believe is the most accurate depiction of events occurring inside and outside of the house, leading up to Casey and Steve's murder. In terms of why Billy and Stu have targeted Casey and Steve, the rationale is kind of twofold. On one hand, this is a revenge plot for Stu, who is embarrassed for having been dumped for the stronger, athletic, and seemingly more desirable Steve. And on the other hand, and more importantly, Casey sits next to Sydney in English. So this would be a very indirect way for the duo to get under Sydney's skin very early on. As I've said many times before, Billy is primarily the caller throughout the movie, and in this scene in particular, he is the one on the phone. My reasoning for that is that he's just more suave and intelligent than Stu is, and as the idea man, he would be the one manipulating Casey, while Stu does all the heavy lifting, setting up Steve in the patio chair. We also know all of the calls were made from Neil Prescott's phone, so the only way that could make logical sense is if they somehow stole it from him prior to the start of the movie. As the one doing all the grunt work, Stu is also the one who runs up and guts Steve after Casey gets the trivia question wrong, and also throws the chair through the patio doors, running into the house to let Billy in through the front door. Stu is also the ghost face that Casey sees in the kitchen, who then turns around at the window, startling and attacking her until he's temporarily knocked out. The next time we see Ghostface, when he seemingly jumps out of nowhere to tackle Casey, this is Billy. The reasoning behind this is that there are subtle nuances in the way each one of them holds their knife and attacks their victim. While Stu clasps the handle using both hands as he raises the knife over his head, Billy holds his in just his right hand as he raises his arm above his shoulder. Based on what we see here, Billy's MO is also to strangle his victims before he stabs them, as we see him do later on in the film as he's attacking Sydney, whereas Stu's more likely to slice and dice, as indicated by his knowledge and boastfulness of the subject at the water fountain the next day. This should then indicate to us that the ghost-faced unmasked by Casey is indeed Billy, who she would recognize regardless, considering he is her ex-boyfriend's best friend, and someone she would have likely seen many times at school. Billy then drags Casey over to the big oak tree, where Stu helps hang her body in record time, before hollowing out her insides and running off into the night. We do know that Stu was with Tatum that night, based on her line from the next day, but that doesn't indicate that it was all night or if it was before or after the murders took place. But based on the next scene where we're introduced to Sydney, I'd say it's likely that he was at Tatum's house prior to Casey's murder, which I'll do my best to make sense of for you. In order to draw this conclusion, however, we need to recognize Wes Craven's brilliance, because every scene and shot in this movie is necessary and contains many layers of cognitive visual detailing that paints a larger picture for us. This scene, for example, on the surface is just a typical character introduction for Sydney and Billy. We meet our protagonist, and it establishes history and relation through Kevin Williamson's script. Basically, any director could film this scene, as it's pretty straightforward. When we examine the scene a little deeper though, having already watched the movie once, knowing the fact that Billy is indeed the killer, we now realize that his late night visit is a little more calculated, as he's using it to create an alibi for himself. But when you really hone in on the details, you realize that there's something much more sinister afoot than this scene one would ever have you believe. Specifically, we need to look at Neil Prescott. This is, for all intents and purposes, the last time Sydney will see her father until the final act. He even establishes in dialogue that he's going to bed now because he's leaving very early in the morning for a business trip, and he won't be seeing her again until he gets back. The fact that he is wearing the exact ensemble in both of his appearances in this movie suggests that Billy and Stu came to Sydney's house together with the intent to kidnap her father. So while Billy has snuck into her bedroom to distract her, Stu's come into the house, knocked out Neil Prescott, and at some point during the night after Sydney goes to sleep, takes Neil and his car back to his house where he would be able to hide both of them as his parents were seemingly out of town themselves. Skipping ahead to the next day, late afternoon, we can see Sydney arriving home alone after getting dropped off by the school bus. I do believe that Billy and Stu both got to her house before she did and were waiting for nightfall to make their move. Billy, of course, would have been hiding outside of the house while Stu had already broken in and was camped out inside of the hall closet. We do hear a very ominous musical cue when Sydney goes to open the closet to retrieve her overnight bag, but doesn't look any further inside as she closes the door very quickly. Moments later, after she's switched off the TV and has walked back towards the front of the house, she stops and hears a creaking noise coming from the closet, but chooses to ignore it and continues over to the living room where she falls asleep on the couch at 6:45 p.m. About 31 minutes later, Sydney is awoken by Tatum's phone call, after which Billy then calls Sydney with the intent on luring her out to the front porch so that Stu can surprise her by lunging out from the closet when she goes back inside the house. We know this is Stu based on how he's holding the knife here, running the blade across her throat and then raising it over his head with both hands. Also, as Stu is chasing Sydney up the stairs, we can distinctly hear his voice. Listen again. He can be heard saying "easy, easy," which we then hear again the next time we see him at the school lockers.
Oh, easy.
Bet you never noticed that before. Also, notice he's checking his forehead for a bump or bruise after headbutting Sydney from the night before, and possibly for also getting hit in the head with a phone by Casey the night before that. I'm not gonna try and break down the logic of this attack, as it doesn't seem as though they're trying to kill her here, but rather just rattle her cage and set up this whole bait and switch with Billy being the suspect. But we know that before Billy climbed into Sydney's window again, he must have left Neil Prescott's phone somewhere outside for Stu to collect, as the phone he drops in the bedroom belongs to his father, Hank Loomis. After this, Neil Prescott's phone is only used one more time in the movie, and that is by Stu, who calls Tatum's house later that night in order to corroborate Billy's perceived innocence. Next up, we have the school restroom scene, and this one is quite easy to justify because it's neither Billy nor Stu. It's a prankster. It's more than expressly stated to be a prank, and that is very evident in the fact that Ghostface doesn't even have a knife here, not to mention the fact that there was no feasible way Billy could follow Sydney into the restroom without her or the bitchy classmates seeing him. We also know this isn't Stu because he's seen wearing khakis while this particular prankster has dark blue denim jeans on. After classes are cancelled due to the curfew, while Stu is outside the school inviting friends to his shindig, Billy stays behind and murders Principal Himbry in his office. We know it's Billy based on how he holds his knife, and the fact that he's more about the stabby stab than the slicey slice. The purpose of Himbry's murder was simply so that Billy and Stu could use him as a diversion to clear out the last of the party guests, which we find out later on. But for the time being, Billy's just gonna leave Himbry's body at the school while he goes and tends to other things. And those other things entail going to Tatum's house to spy on the girls talking on the porch, and then again later in the supermarket. This is the one aspect of the movie that I find very unnecessary and illogical. With a curfew in effect and police combing the streets, why would he risk getting caught in broad daylight in downtown Woodsboro? In any event, I do believe Billy would have been the Ghostface in this scenario, as he wouldn't let Stu do this on his own given his capricious nature. Not to mention that as the mastermind, Billy would want to be the one getting close enough within earshot to make sure everything was right on schedule with Sydney and Tatum. If anything, I would imagine Stu acted as a lookout while Billy did this, as we know the two had met up after school and entered the video store together at the same time. Presumably after this, they went back to the school when it was darker out to hang Principal Himbry's body from the goalpost, at which point they went to Stu's house to set everything up for the party. During the party, Billy hides just off of the back room that connects the garage to the kitchen, where he waits for Stu to send Tatum to grab more beer. This would make Billy the Ghostface who ultimately attacks Tatum and crushes her in the garage door. My reasoning for this is that Stu is busy hosting a party and wouldn't have had an opportunity to disappear for an extended period of time. Billy also arrives just in time at the front door, having ditched his costume and sneaking out the side of the house in order to circle around. He also gives Stu an affirming look that suggests Tatum's been taken care of. With Billy and Sydney now upstairs, Stu gets away from his guests to call his landline from Neil's cell phone in a disguised voice, where he tells Randy about Principal Himbry, causing the rest of the guests to leave. I guess maybe they got a little more usage out of that phone after all. With the house now emptied out, he's able to sneak up into his parents' bedroom to fake Billy's death in front of Sydney. Notice how he holds the knife here, and chases her around through the upstairs level. Now it does seem as though from this point moving forward, Billy is playing dead upstairs while Stu is doing most of the work. But I just can't accept Billy leaving all that responsibility to his partner alone while he's just sitting up there twiddling his thumbs. So I do believe that there's more involvement on Billy's end in between the time where we see him fake his death to the point where he emerges from the upstairs bedroom. However, after Sydney discovers Tatum's body and runs off, it is still Stu that enters the den, creeping up behind Randy. Again, we know that this is Stu by the way he's holding the knife, before being distracted by Sydney's screams, drawing him out of the house and right up to the news van where he slits Kenny's throat. With Sydney getting away from Stu for a second time, Billy as Ghostface comes out of the house to help him find her, and as they notice Gail and Dewey returning to the property, they quickly prop Kenny's body up onto the top of the news van. My reasoning is that that's a two-man job. Billy then goes back inside the house while Stu stays behind outside and hides from Gail. He then follows her as she drives off and accidentally crashes the van into a tree, where he checks on her to incorrectly determine that she had died. While this is all going down, Randy spots Stu without his mask on and runs back to the house with Stu in pursuit of him. Meanwhile, Dewey, who has gone inside the house, is stabbed in the back by Billy, who follows behind him as he then stumbles out the front door. Billy chases Sydney to the police cruiser, where she locks herself inside as he torments her with the keys before sneaking in through the hatchback and attempts to strangle her, as Billy likes to do. After Sydney breaks away, he quickly disappears around the side of the house, where he runs into Stu. Stu informs him that Gail is dead and that Randy knows he's the killer. We know that Stu told Billy about Gail, as Billy questions him on it when she shows up later, so there had to be some point where the two of them reconvened before they revealed themselves to Sydney. Billy then runs back into the house through the garage and up the back stairwell to position himself at the top of the main stairwell, while Stu runs to the front of the house just in time to intercept Randy. And from that point on, the rest is history. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with that assessment. Next time we'll be covering the slightly more confusing Windsor College Massacre from Scream 2, where we'll do the same thing all over again, but with Mickey and Mrs. Loomis. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporter Andre Felix. This video was dedicated to you, bud. If you're looking for additional content or just want to support the channel, I'll be doing weekly fan commentaries over on my Patreon account, starting with the Scream franchise, naturally. But if you're just about that YouTube content, you can check out some of my ranking videos right here. As always, thank you so much for watching. I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.